Tonight, learn the shocking truth behind the legend and discover the dark secrets hidden for nearly a century at the bottom of the Atlantic. Travel back in time as we unravel mysteries long believed unsolvable. Now, at last, the lies and whitewashes can be exposed, and the true story can finally be told. Join us for Titanic, Secrets Revealed. Exploration of a wreckage has finally forced the facts to the surface. As if speaking from the grave, Titanic has revealed powerful new physical evidence that is rewriting history. Tonight, we'll tell you the true Titanic story. It's not a love story. It's a sometimes sordid tale of greed, corruption, cover-ups, cowardice, and what some call cold-blooded murder. She was the grandest of all, and a technological triumph over nature, but had unnatural forces doomed her from the start. Eerie omens and premonitions seemed to point to disaster.
My father had a very bad dream before he left, but he would never tell my mother what it was.
Did the greedy, powerful men in control for the quest for profits above safety, condemning 1,500 passengers to untimely death?
The ship was designed to have 64 lifeboats, but they needed to have more luxury and better views, and so they moved it down to 16.
And now, the Titanic herself breaks a decades-old silence. Does her wreckage cry proof of criminal negligence, or even mass murder?
When I saw the ship go, I heard the horrid sounds of people drowning.
Were the official investigations nothing but a scandalous mockery? The greatest cover-up of its day? What really sank the ship? Was it a jinx captain who had already wrecked the Titanic's sister ship? Or was it the man who ran the company, who risked safety for glory? Was unsinkable. We had tamed the ocean itself, or so we thought. That she would end her one and only voyage as a steel coffin on the bottom of the sea seemed impossible. But in 5 short days, her majesty would end, and her mystery would begin. By the turn of the century, the North Atlantic, once a graveyard of shipwrecks, had evolved dramatically. For cargo ships, it had become a superhighway of shipping lanes. For passenger liners, it was now a racetrack where the world's richest men gambled for glory and fortunes. The competition was fierce, but Bruce Ismay was even fiercer.
Bruce Ismay was very desirous as the leader of the White Star Lines and the man who could make a lot of money out of the domination of these sea lines to succeed.
With millions at stake, Ismay set in motion dramatic plans to rule the waves. In 1908, an army of Irish labourers began work on his ambitious vision. The world had ever seen. But it wasn't enough. Ismay wanted more. The shipyard now turned to building the vessel that would give it to him, the Titanic.
It was very much a labour-intensive job. When you see the standards of workmanship, you always wonder how on earth they managed with the facilities, the limited facilities that they had compared with what we use nowadays.
14,000 men worked night and day to ready the ship for launch.
Nobody could stand in the way of a central bank. Not even some of the wealthiest people in all the world. John Jacob Astor understood that. He was the wealthiest man besides the Pope in the world in the early 1900s. John Jacob Astor knew of the plan to establish a central bank in the United States. He knew of the meetings at Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia around 1907 and 1908. He knew about those, and he knew about the plan to set up a central bank in America. He opposed it. So did this other man. His name was Isidor Straus, the man who made the jeans. Made millions. Very, very wealthy men. They both died on a ship called the Titanic in 1912. They stood in the way of Rome's plans to have a central bank in America. They dared to visit and to express that. And there are others that opposed it too. A man coming into the screen here, Benjamin Guggenheim, along with Astor and Rouse, were among the many wealthy that died on the maiden voyage of the Titanic. They all had another thing in common besides dying on the Titanic that night. And what was it that they all had in common? You see, friends, when you analyze history, plans were put into effect to set up the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, 1906, 1907, 1908. Nothing was going to stand in the way of that. But many wealthy expressed their objection to a central bank. They were removed on the Titanic. And about 20 months after thinking of the Titanic, with very few members of Congress still in Washington because the winter break, the holiday break, Woodrow Wilson passed through the Federal Reserve Act. The most important of these were Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, the Macy's department, and John Jacob Astor, probably the wealthiest man in the world. Their total wealth at that time, using dollar values, was more than $500 billion. Today, that amount of money would be worth nearly $11 billion. These three men were coaxed and encouraged to board the floating palace, had to be destroyed because the Jesuits knew they would use their wealth to oppose a Federal Reserve Bank, as well as the various wars that were being planned. We have J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan was the man who had the Titanic built. It was J.P. Morgan's fund that funded the Titanic. J.P. Morgan had a shipping embargo. He had a fleet of ships that was called the White Star Line. And with J.P. Morgan's ships, one of them was that he had built was called the Titanic. A Jesuit by the name of Francis Brown, he was a Jesuit priest. He got on board the Titanic. He took pictures of several of the wealthy people on board the Titanic, and then he disembarked. In fact, if you go back to your local library and look up the National Geographic on the Titanic of 1985, I believe it was, there's also a videotape called The Sinking of the Titanic. It's put out by National Geographic. And they talk about, on that videotape, they talk about Father Francis Brown. He was a Jesuit priest.